Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Thoughtsilla. I know there was a long gap between the second and third episode, but we are here. Better late than never. And as usual, I'm joined by Sai Shekhar. Hi, Shekhar.
Hello, Manish.
Today's guest on our podcast is Aditya G S. He has a very interesting academic journey. He has done his master's in London School of Economics and Political Science. He has done his internship at High Commission of India in London. So that's a cool internship. So let's just start by asking Aditya, like, what was your school life like? Did you go to a really poor school, or how was your schooling journey like?
Right. First of all, thank you for having me here, guys. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys previously as well. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm glad we are born and brought up in the same city that you guys are in right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, speaking about my school life, it's not been that adventurous as it sounds to be, or how much people make it sound like. I was born in Bellary, pursued my kindergarten in Hospet in a school called Dipayan. Uh, and then I moved into Bellary in my first grade, and then I was studying at Nandi School till my fifth grade. And after that, I had to move to Dreamworld, and I had to study there for 4 years. And after that, again, it was the Chandrakant Patil School in Gulbarga, and I had to pursue my 10th there. Like, if you keep noticing, I've been like throughout Karnataka just for my schooling, considering that my dad is civil servant and government officer, and
Hmm.
then we need to keep going here and there, and that's pretty much been part of my life. So nothing really posh, I would say. Rather, it's been a very normal life, and it's been quite an interesting journey, and a lot of good friends and amazing people that I met. But not really as posh as a lot of people face today, especially in coming up and growing up in Bangalore. I never grew up in a metro city or a cosmopolitan city till I was in my 12th grade or 11th grade.
The amazing thing about metropolitan city, like, because I moved to Bangalore like a couple of years ago, so now I'm in hospital because
Mm-hmm.
of the pandemic and everything. But the one thing that I saw there was these schools don't have big playgrounds, which is like a big turn off for me because I like to play
Hmm.
a lot. And
True, true,
the
true.
and doing your schooling in normal cities like tier 2 cities is really fun. Like, most people don't realize that, but there's a lot of stuff that you cannot get in Bangalore.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
So I often keep, saying this because I moved to Bangalore while I was in my degree first year. I was just making fun of those people who had been, grown up in Bangalore and they're pursuing their undergrad. I just said, your life and our life is so different in a way because, growing up in small
Hmm.
cities, you can just go wherever you want within 5 minutes or 10 minutes span. You make
Yeah.
so many good friends, and it's just not friends, but you also make friends with the family. You unofficially become a part of their family as well, because that's how
True.
we
True.
grow up, and that's because of the distance. We don't have so much physical proximity existing between us and the other person's home, because we often go up in the same school, we often grow up, and even if we had to change schools, so we had to change our houses, it's not really that far away.
Yeah.
But that's one best thing about the small cities, which obviously the big cities can't offer. And I think one thing that the big cities offer is probably a good posh English, uh, which according to my opinion, isn't a big change or a big game changer in your life. I've been there. As soon as I
True.
entered Christ in my undergrad, I've seen people, showing off with their posh English skills and other stuff. But at the end of the day, when you realize the basic of their argument or the basic of their communication is nothing except for good English, and basically they have
Yeah.
no other skills except for speaking and communicating in English. That's a major source of laughter for me, because for growing up in a small city, at least we have done well. We have grown up with societies.
Yeah.
We see the core realities of societies.
I have first-hand experience of what you're exactly saying, so I can completely relate to that.
Aditya, you
Uh,
made a really great point, I must say, because when the base of the argument isn't strong enough, or what you're
yeah.
talking is not making sense, there is no point which language or which accent you're talking and what kind of vocabulary you're using.
Hmm.
So coming to the main question, or like
True.
what is like what made you get into this international political science and stuff, and how was your experience at Christ and also at
Right.
LSE, the journey of getting into deep into this thing.
So let me be frank here, as we discussed before, like I've been born and brought up in these small cities. I haven't seen a
Hmm.
bigger city life till my 11th or 12th grading. And so before that, in my schooling life, as I said, like we enjoyed, we made fun. It was a huge part of my life, and most of the times in my schooling life, especially considering the dream world schooling life, like when I was in my 8th and 7th grade, those were the key teenage years. As usual, the adolescence hits you too hard, the puberty hits you too hard. You want to gain
Yeah.
attention, you want to do a lot of mischiefs, you want to do this, you want to do that. So I was one of those
Yeah.
topmost mischievous kids in my class itself. Like every time my physics teacher entered in, he used to throw me out, uh, considering the nuisance I used to make, and the fun we used to make in the class. This was all been part of it. And sometimes it's just been that I forgot to realize what my importance really were at that point of time. But having done all this, I knew where my interest was, and that was always in social sciences class. Because no matter how much fun I made in physics, mathematics class, teachers threw me out. Teachers said, you're not going to succeed, you're going to fail, and all this. A lot of
Hmm.
negative comments that used to come with the recognition of your behavior and other stuff. I always had a keen interest in social sciences since my schooling. Um,
True.
so probably because of how how history was interesting for me, or how much efforts my teachers have put in developing and making history more interesting, or making political science more interesting. I was never a geography or core politics student. Rather, I was a core history student. I loved history all throughout the day. Like anytime I got time, anytime I was free, I just used to take a history book and start reading it. And that was basically my core interest in history. And unfortunately, not a lot of people recognize your interest in social sciences in India. So yeah, that was just a part of it. I mean, like,
Yeah.
although I got very less score in science, in mathematics, I used to get considerable good amount of score in social sciences. But not a lot of people recognize it, because at the end of the day, it was just like, oh, what
Hmm.
happened to your science score, what happened to your math score, blah blah blah. So after this, I had to move to Gulbarga for my 10th schooling. And there, it's not just the prime of your adolescence. You already lost your attention seeking willingness, and now you're more focused on your like on studies rather than your 10th examination in itself. That was a major challenge for anyone that's coming on the other day. So for me, at that point of time, the school was new, the teachers were new. I had to face the same old issues. But the only person who even encouraged me at that point of time was my history teacher. When most of my science teachers and my mathematics teachers were like, oh, you're fit for nothing, you're not going to do anything, and all these things, my social science teachers were really supportive and were really keen of me, letting know more of history, letting know more of political science, or more of economics. But I was core history student, so that's what I probably focused on. um, but I was never interested, or I never saw myself doing arts intermediate, or arts +1 +2, and then going back to a university, and then doing BA in history, economics, and political science. Nor did I imagine that I would be having a master's in international relations. And that's a quite stressful journey, because once I finished my 10th, a lot of pressure came in, peer pressure, family pressures, like what you're going to do next. And that's obviously, I guess every one of us have been through there
Yeah.
through their life, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people, strangers you never met, your parents friends you never met, your parents friends whom you never spoke to for 10 years, 15 years, all of a sudden they call you up now. They're like, oh beta, what are you doing next? What do you want to do next? Why don't you take science? Why don't you take engineering? Why don't you take medical? uh, Blah blah blah. This
Yeah.
happened for
Yeah.
2 months. And I was very up for it. because I never imagined myself doing arts, intermediate or arts plus one plus two, and I
Yeah.
knew my parents wouldn't be very encouraging of it at the first point of time. I was very shy to
Mm.
put it forward in the very first days, because the core employment sectors in India are obviously medical. That's medical and engineering, and you have no other option except for these two paths if you're past
Yeah.
your 10th. So I had to
Yeah.
go through this phase, but fortunately I never realized. Like, one of my friend had mockingly told me, in my 10th grade, you're gonna take up social sciences for your PUC and other stuff. And I said, it's never gonna happen, because my parents are never gonna be very happy with the fact, because my dad in himself wanted me to pursue medical sciences and wanted me to be a doctor. um,
Mm.
and after my 10th, I started taking bridge course classes for science courses, and I was in Gulbarga, so I was very keen on doing sciences. And my parents were like, obviously, do sciences. My dad's friends, everyone just turned up. They're like, just go
Mm.
for sciences, you have no other option. There's once or twice I asked them, is like, how would my life be if I had to do arts? A lot of pessimism came in, a lot of negativity came in, especially from your cousins, from a lot of other people, from your friends. Like, what are you going to do after doing arts? You're going to sweep the building, you're going to be a peon, you're going to be a security person, or whatever. A lot of negativity was attached to arts. And I was like, it was just in the first 15 or 20 days after my 10th exams I was keen on doing arts. And after that, it just flew out of my head, like, because I had so much of negativity and pessimism about doing arts and how our career is going to be after arts. Considering it's not a new part of our social trend or social norm, what
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
parents or our peer wants us to pursue, or what they want to do. Our parents generally, or our relatives generally, want us to take a career path which they've never experienced, and they would probably imagine would be a better for our life. I
Yeah. Yeah.
understand their anxiety, where it comes from, but at the end of the day, I think it's up to our own interests and our core, where we're keen and
Yeah.
where our strengths are. That's where our future lies.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it took a lot of time. And after my 10th, and after my 10th, during my 10th vacations, when I took the bridge course classes, then I started having a conversation again, and my parents were like, started giving a second thought. Why to push someone into something where he doesn't know if he wants to pursue his career. So if I were in medical, if I were in engineering today, probably I wouldn't be here with you guys on this call, I suppose. So
Yeah.
yeah, I knew, like, science and mathematics weren't my things. So I probably, yeah, then my parents started giving me a second thought. They started giving me a second option, like, right in the end of May, and that's just before where your course, and where your PUC starts. So while having this conversation, then we had a long conversations. And then my dad was like, you want to do, if you are going to do, if you're never interested in medical engineering, then you should probably take up arts. That's your option, but you should take up UPSC if you're going to take up arts, because that's where the future is, and there's nothing else except for that. uh, yeah, I did accept for it, and that was the turning point of my life, I would say. Because
Yeah.
after I took up arts and I was going to Hyderabad for my arts coaching, it was my dad who
Mm.
called me up, and he said me one thing right onto my face. He's like, you have fought all the way for 3 months, and you're doing something you want to do for the rest of your life. So make sure whatever you do is very productive, and you need to show yourself that you're the best. You can't cheat on yourself, because you've argued, you've fought with yourself, and you're here finally, so you can't do it anymore. So I did realize the depth of what he was actually trying to say. And I think that was the most life changing thing that happened to me. And that was the day I realized where I need to get all my shit together, and I need to start focusing on a lot of things, especially my career when it comes to arts. And
Yeah.
there I was, new to the whole thing, especially considering I was in Hyderabad. It was a new state, it was a new people all around. But my teachers were
Mm.
really, really, supportive. They said how to go ahead. I was like, one of those people who came from CBSE, considering most of the people from AP and Telangana are like still state SSC graduates when
Yeah.
they come to PUC or when they come to intermediate. So I was one of their top catchers, obviously, because they were like, oh, obviously CBSE student and he's son of a bureaucrat, so he's gonna have some skills or the other. And
Yeah.
apparently that opportunity worked out really well for me. Teachers started encouraging me. I started giving up open speeches. I started giving up more just a minute talks. I started writing essays. I started talking to people, making more friends, productive conversations, and amazing teachers. I There's one thing that I always remember about these people is my the teachers that I had to face, especially two or three teachers who always kept my hopes up. They were like, "You're one of those top-notch students who can never come down, or you should never aim at coming down because we know your potentiality and you can do this, you can do that." I think that played a major role. And if they weren't there, I would probably be not where I am today. So I think that's one major thing that happened to me is like my teachers played a major role in my PUC, and that after that I was like, I'm probably gonna go to Christ, do a BA, and then pursue my UPSC. And then I was
Hmm.
in Christ again. Not a lot of teachers that I was profoundly liking, but there was one of my history HOD, history HOD, and she was one of the amazing teachers I met, and she was an inspiration to me. And from there, I slowly built up. I became a class representative. I became a student council member for Christ University, and then I was like, uh, without realizing I was in LSC. I was just like, it was in a blink of an eye, and things just transformed
Yeah.
from where they were.
So that's a really, what do you call a great journey kind of a thing, going into the unknown, to be honest, like going into the unknown is not everyone really dares to take it. And
Hmm.
even if people go into the unknown, the chances are, you underestimate yourself and you stop performing. You don't perform to your fullest potential.
True.
I mean, I've seen that's why most of the people fail actually. They go into the unknown and things don't work out. It's everything is new and there is no fixed path kind of thing.
Hmm.
And they start giving up and stuff happens. But I mean, this is a kind of an example where going into the unknown is also works out and will take you places where you can't even imagine yourself you'll be there.
True. True. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I think
sorry.
everyone needs this catalyst, right?
Hmm.
Like he said, your father said to you that you have fought all these people and you
Hmm.
have to achieve something. So that kind of pushed you
True.
to achieve this kind of excellence.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And in a way, I'm really, happy for what my family had done at the end moment. They were like, just do whatever, but just succeed in it. And I think I'm quite fortunate enough for, parents to have who understand that. Unfortunately, I still
yeah,
speak to a lot of people today who say, I can't do this, I can't do that because probably my family doesn't allow for it or something. But in that
yeah.
context, I consider myself, quite lucky where I was encouraged, I was asked to do what I really wanted to do. And also the teachers who played a major role at the part of, while I was pursuing my plus one, plus two, I think that had a major role to, do whatever I was today.
Aditya, like I want to ask you,
Hmm.
when you made this change from Bangalore to London, where like you went from Christ to LAC, like
Right.
what were the key differences that you saw from education systems or processes here and there, and what were like the things that you had to cope up with or
Hmm.
stuff like that?
Right. So yeah, like just before I move to what's happening in London or what happened in London, just let me throw light on how things are very different in India back here.
Yeah,
We all take things for granted, the house that we get, the friends that we make, the people that we meet, and also obviously the
true,
education
true.
system that we have in our hand. um,
Yeah,
all the way in Christ, you had to succeed, you had to be at the top of your game, you just had to, read whatever the book says, and you never have to use your brain because probably Indian education system never asks you to use it. uh, so you just do a lot of rote learning, and then at the end of the day you're on the top of your game, you're like a distinction student, you're a top-notch student, and
yeah.
and you're everywhere all around the world, you're popular among your university, you're popular among your friends and all these things. It happens to be in India. But I was often warned before I moved to London, you're going to face a lot of cultural shocks, you're going to face a lot of educational shocks,
Hmm.
etc., etc. And I think I probably took them for granted because obviously the best way for a human being to learn is through experience. Uh,
Yeah,
so yeah, I was in London, and there's a lot of things that matter and that change in London because especially education in the West, in the UK or in the US, never asks for rote learning. They have zero tolerance for rote learning, and all they want you to do is use your own brain and use your own arguments and use your own way of expressing your own ideas, right? So I was this top notch student at Christ, always on the top of my game. So as soon as I was in London, I had to
Hmm.
face huge difficulties, because in India, if you have to succeed, the only way to calculate your smartness or your greatness is through your marks, and that's obviously that still prevails today, unfortunately. But once I went back to London, things were so different, and it was for the first time in my like 6 or 7 years of life, I failed in a subject for the first 2 months. um,
Okay.
it was completely disheartening, and I was like so frustrated all the time. I was like, I was this, I was that, and all of a sudden, I don't see myself being that person. I don't see myself being what I used to be before, and all these things. And it kept happening, and obviously a lot of things happened to come and go in your mind. And that was like, that was a kind of eye opener for me, because no one really cares about your rote learning, and no one cares what the other person has to say. At the end of the day, they care what you have to bring to your exam paper, what you have to bring to the academic sector, and what you have to argue to make yourself into a better innovator, better policy maker. So
Hmm.
that's one thing I definitely faced while I was at London. And after a point of time, I was still disappointed, considering my consistent low grading, and
Hmm.
like 56 or 57 marks out of 60, out of 100 was relatively very low. And most of my friends were like, most of them who graduated from the English universities were already in 60s or 70s and 80s, because they graduated from English universities. They knew how the education standards were, and it was quite an unfair comparison or advantage for me at that point of time.
Hmm.
But growing up in these societies where marks are everything, you still can't get these things out of your head. You still like, oh, I got a 56 out of 100, which is really low. In a
Hmm.
way, I started underestimating myself. I was like, oh, okay, so if I get a 49 out of 100, it's very least. It's if I get a
Hmm.
56 out of 100, it's quite low, and all these things. But at the end of the day, like, I met few teachers. I had constant talks to them. I kept talking to them. I kept discussing with them, and all of them came up with the same thing: marks doesn't
Hmm.
matter. No one gives, like, really cares about your marks in the UK. No one really cares about your marks in the West, because at the end of the day, even if you have to get hired, no one really cares about your marks. No one really cares about your what percent you got in so and so paper, because no one really cares about it. At the end of the day, they care about your skills, your arguments, and
Yeah.
how you want to bring something onto your paper.
Hmm. Like Aditya, you said the things that we take
Mm-hmm.
granted, like our house,
Mm-hmm.
because I know abroad, the housing is not very affordable.
Right.
And how did you like make ends meet, or what was your cultural differences there? Like, how did you like have friends there?
Mm-hmm.
Like these cultural differences. What was your journey through these cultural
Right.
changes specifically?
Uh, so before I moved into London, I mean, it's just obviously a lot of stereotypes happen to be before you meet people of different kinds. Like, okay, so these people are going
Yeah.
to be racist. These people are going to, keep you
Okay.
down. These people are not going to encourage, and all these things. So once I moved into London, things were quite different, at least for me, considering that, LSE is one of the most liberal universities
Hmm.
in the world. A lot of people make fun of London School of Economics, saying it's a liberal school of economics, considering how the society and the
Yeah.
students over there learn and interact with each other. So for me, it was
Yeah.
a kind of a big change, because obviously we come from society where privacy is not a big thing. You share your room with 6 people, 7 people. You share your house with 8 people, 9 people. You always have your parents to cook to. You always have your father, your cousins to talk to, and all these things keep happening while you're in India, right? But
Hmm.
once you're in the UK, things are so different. At a point of time, you don't want to share a lot of things with your parents. You don't want to share a lot of things with your family, because you're scared what they're going to think or what they're going to assume, because they're not in your shoes right now, right? Because
Hmm.
they don't understand. They can only sympathize, they can only empathize, but they can't understand the situation you're in. They wouldn't really understand if I had to say, I'm alone right now. I feel very lonely right now, because it's a kind of transition that you have to go through. And obviously people in
Hmm.
India wouldn't understand because they have not been there, or they have not been through that situation at that point of time. um,
Hmm.
so obviously I tried to keep a lot of things for myself. I couldn't share with a lot of people, or especially at home, considering how they would react, or if they would be sad for saying I'm feeling alone, if they would be happy for feeling alone, because they don't really know what I'm facing. So I
Yeah.
didn't want to make a huge fuss of it. And at the same point of time, you realize, like, most of the friends you make are really good friends. Especially for me, I tried, how do you say, coming out of my comfort zone. So while I was
Hmm.
in London, a lot of people, I saw from other universities were more with Indians, were more with making friends with Indians, because they said, no matter how much we try with the people of other races, people of other countries, they still want to stick around with similar kind of people rather than sticking around with Indians. But
Hmm.
fortunately, I never had such kind of opportunities or such kind of discouragement. I was always there. A lot of people from different countries, like I met people from all over Europe. I met people from Africa. I met people from Middle East. I met people from East Asia as well, and sometimes people from China, which and Pakistan as well. And it was
Yeah.
quite a eye-opening experience for me. It's
Hmm.
considering how different that we think of different people while we are at our home, and considering how we think of different people while we are um, outside our homes. People are they're really nice. They're not demons. They're not going to eat up us alive. They help us
Yeah.
in whatever way possible. They try to assist you. And I had this um, a great luck of being with such kind of people who are always there for me, helping. But at the same point of time, they had their own cultural barriers, and I had my own cultural barriers. For me, just entering into my friend's house without his permission, without his without calling him, wouldn't be a big thing. But for them, you probably have to call them. You still have to have a an open appointment at, like, say, I'm going to call you at 8, would you be free? I'm going to call you at 9, would you be free? So these kind of social barriers are always there.
Hmm.
Considering how you would want to take forward a conversation, and how rude it would be for a culture, like, say, for us, body shaming someone, or culturally uh, saying someone is a black, or
True.
saying someone is white, is amazing, is
Yeah.
handsome just because he's white, she's beautiful just because she's white, would be very common, would be very ingrained into our
Yeah.
culture. But it's not the same. So we also need to be picky about what we speak to other people, how do we speak to other people, which is quite a kind of barrier. But again, as I said, if we look from our lenses, things might be very different. But if we go into their shoes and see how things are, you wouldn't see they're not really different from us. There we are
Hmm.
similar in a lot of ways, but at the same point of time, we do have a lot of cultural barriers, but it can be overcome eventually. And they might take a bit of mental toll on you, they might take a bit of cultural toll on you, but at the end of the day, it's not as bad as people imagine it to be. That's one thing
Yeah.
I actually presume from staying in the UK.
I have to say, I mean, that is a lot of things you have said. I mean, if you sit down and deeply observe, like whatever you are told, I mean, every point of time, everyone faces these things. Like you said, like you're lonely and you can't express to your friends, your
Hmm.
family, your parents. I mean, that is, they can't understand what you're like, they can't understand the situation, why they are lonely and stuff.
Right.
Except
Hmm.
you, nobody knows what you're really going through and what you really want.
True.
Saying that helps, it is, people say saying helps, talking out helps. It
Hmm.
doesn't really help. You have to figure out yourself and discover like what you're going through inside, and
True.
then
True.
Yeah.
make peace within yourself. Like, okay, this is it. Some journeys are meant to be alone, and over time,
Hmm.
Yeah.
the roads collide, and where people
Right.
come together. That was very, I also, like, there are times, I felt, okay, some journeys are meant to be alone. You have
Hmm.
to just accept it and go through it. And the next one was the cross culture. Yeah, we never really have that kind of a diversity experience with different cultural people. Actually,
Hmm.
True.
even
True.
though India is diverse enough, we all are like, like common,
Hmm.
bonded
Yeah.
together. But when it comes to different countries experience, we have never interacted with a lot of
Hmm.
people from different countries and cultures. So we need to be, really careful and, very conscious enough what we are talking about and what
Yeah.
we are picking up,
Yeah.
because that might really make a bad name, even though our intentions are right,
Hmm.
but the statements we make might not seem right to them, might be, kind of offensive stuff.
True.
So,
True.
and also the cross culture is really a beautiful thing. I feel, we get to understand what's really happening, then, their roots,
Hmm.
that gives rise to another form of way to see life in a different aspect, I feel.
One thing I would also like to add is, like, staying in India. we say we look at South Asia as a different subcontinent.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
once you go, to countries like UK, where we have a lot of South Asian diaspora staying there, and you have a lot of South Asian students studying with you, especially the Pakistanis or the Afghanis, or the Bangladeshis, the Sri Lankans, whom you never met or you would have never met as a student or as a fellow
Yeah.
citizen. It's just quite amazing to see, like, um, how just the nation states or just the borders have differentiated uh, 7 or 8 different states, but you're not really different from each other. I go to I go to a shop and I try shopping. There's an Afghani guy who talks to me in Hindi, which is quite surprising. And I come down, I go talk to Pakistani shopkeeper in Hindi, and he still understands because Urdu and Hindi are so similar. And at the same point of time, you go to talk to a Nepali, he understands how Hindi is quite similar to us, and a Bangladeshi can still understand you. And it's a lot of like your food practices, the way you make comments on others, like even the body shaming, the racist. These are all quite ingrained into the South Asian thing. We have it quite similar in the cultural context that we talk about,
Yeah.
which we don't realize while we are in our own nation states or in our own nations, saying that probably the person from Pakistan, everyone's bad. Probably the person from Sri Lanka, everyone is rude. Probably the person from
Hmm.
Bangladesh is always an illegal migrant or something. But we don't realize,
Yeah.
once we go out, you start meeting these people, you just realize they're more similar to you than any other person can be. So for me, a Pakistani can be more similar to in cultural wise than compared to a European, or compared to American, or compared to a Chinese as well. So it's quite interesting thing that we always discover while we are outside India.
And Aditya, I want to ask you about your internship with the High Commission of India in London.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that Minister of External Affairs
Hmm.
does offer an internship, even domestically as well as in the abroad missionaries or embassies. So,
Right.
how did you apply for the internship? Like, how was the competition like?
Mm.
And what was your experience in this internship? Could you just elaborate
Right.
on that, please?
Um, so before that, just let me enlighten everyone who's listening to this. Is like, so the Ministry of External Affairs provides an internship from 1 to 6 months of duration for a maximum time. So you can apply for these internships online. You need to send mails to respect to the ministry, and then the ministry sends it to the respective people whom you would want to intern. So first thing you need to realize is the ministry offers you an internship if you're in India, but if you're elsewhere, and if you're still an Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin, or have a non-resident, or are a non-resident Indian in other country, or are the overseas citizen of India, you can apply for an internship, talking to the Ministry of External Affairs, saying that you want to intern in so and so place and so embassy. And then the external affairs ministry confirms if this embassy is ready to offer an internship or not, because not all embassies are huge enough, or not all embassies are happy to have interns around. So it's quite a hectic process, that I would say, obviously considering the red tape bureaucracy of India. But it's an enlightening process. I mean, you understand how foreign policies are made, how secretive documents are drafted, how how a nation state in itself is represented in a small building, and how it looks after a lot of other people of its own diaspora, of its own kind, elsewhere in India,
Okay.
elsewhere outside India. So that's one thing you always have to discover. So you would find this internship application in the Ministry of External Affairs website, and once you start filling it, you start talking to them, and it's going to take a bit of time. ನೋಡ್ತಿರು. But it's always going to be productive. That's what I would say. I mean, considering I was with the Ministry of External Affairs, I had quite a good experience with them. Considering that I was not in the economic, I was with the economic wing, despite considering I was not an economic student for my postgrad, and I was more interested in politics. But it still was a
Hmm.
lot more to learn and a lot more to explore when it comes to working with organizations as the High Commission of India or the Ministry of External Affairs. It's a huge change to your career. It's a huge boost to whatever you want to make a decision or on your life. And it also helps you make a good contact with these respected officials, which is always going to be beneficial at some point of time or the other, considering how much influence they have or how much they're going to help you out in your career and other stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, I have this one silly kind of question.
Right.
So, all these external affairs governments and all these organizations which are working for governments,
Hmm.
where do they get this information from? I mean, like, where do they get this data from? So, I mean, do they
Data
have
of
any sources, to get this data, surveys, and whatever is really happening? And how do they take decisions on based on which kind of data?
So, what kind of decisions are you talking about?
I mean, I'm like any kind of decision might be possible, but
So because you worked in economic wing, he is asking how does the economic wing
Right.
uh,
gather data,
So,
or does
right.
do
So,
they have any particular channels of information that they are trusted that is available to general public, or their sources are completely, confidential and only for them? I mean, can't be shared with public or something like that. Is there anything of
right.
like that?
It's a mixed platform. So, saying I work for the Ministry of External Affairs in the economic wing, there's very least chances of Indians working with the political wing, considering the secrecy and the subtle way of activity of the political wing. So not a lot of interns are encouraged in the political wing. And obviously what happens in political wing doesn't get to doesn't be wouldn't be enlightened to the rest of the public, because it's quite subtle in nature, it's quite diplomatic, and it's quite secretive, and which is for the nation's good. But again, if you had to do something with the economic wing, which you have to do something with the commerce wing, most of the data is available online. And most of the time these data is provided by ministry. Say, I work for the economic wing, so most of the time the data was provided by Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Statistics, Ministry of trade and finance, and like the various ministries help coordinate with the Ministry of External Affairs. So that's where you get your data from. On its own, the Ministry of External Affairs would collect its data if it's considering something with nation's interest, or with political affiliation. Say, intelligence wings which bother something like the country's relations, or the countries, say some countries amassing anti-India propaganda. So that's where these kind of data works, especially that's where the Ministry of External Affairs collects exclusive data. But except for that, they wouldn't generally emphasize in collecting a lot of data, because it doesn't really it's not really secretive in nature. So that's where they let the other ministries accumulate the data and transfer it to them. So that's one thing. But again, what happens in the political wing, and most of the time the army wing of Ministry of External Affairs, stays within them and isn't really circulated,
yeah.
except for the foreign service officers staying in the same country.
This one extended question of like data and everything coming
Hmm.
into the place. So I feel this is the right time.
Right.
So with the internet coming into the play and being a very important, what do you call, the communication medium of people all around the world,
Hmm.
and this also kind of broken this geographical barriers and bringing all the countries people together at one common place.
Right.
Even though there are internet laws, protection laws, every country has,
Mm.
but still there is one or the other way that all the people are together and those laws are not binding or holding them. So
Right.
let's call that it is a kind of a free place where
Hmm.
everyone can come together. So
Right.
with
Yeah.
this freedom of people coming together, there are chances of good things happening and also bad things happening to the
Right.
nations,
Hmm.
like data getting, some secret data being transferred here and there. Like there
Yeah.
is a lot
Yeah.
of cyber attacks and everything is
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
So like I recently saw a news. I don't know how far it's true or not. Like there is some Chinese, trying
Right.
to leak our Indian secretive government data and stuff. I know that would lead to this
Right.
has a lot of potential in leading to like wars or disturbing the peace between nations, and try to being a catalyst and raising some burning issues all around the place. Like
Right.
sharing data and so how far are we good? Like how far is this going to happen? Like is how control are we in giving our data? And like
Right. I
what's the
mean,
scene like?
yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, because I while I was in my second year undergraduate, I was working for a think tank in New Delhi. It's called United Service
Hmm.
Institute of India. So therein, I drafted a research paper on why the international community needs international cyber law, um, because the cyber attacks, as you said, happens within a sovereign territory, and unfortunately you don't have, or your government doesn't have the right to prosecute the person who is indulged in all this cyber attacks, cyber bullying, or cyber warfare kind of tactics involved by the governments or by the non-state actors from other countries or from other states. So you don't have the jurisdiction, so you can't generally arrest them. So in a way, nation states can still use it to dismantle you, to collect your information, to to send it abroad, to make sure your nation's exposed whenever the chances or whenever the time comes it to be exposed. And these are all a part of growing and emerging world. And as you said, China has collected information from India. There's no denial that China has no information of any other countries, and at the same point of time, there is no denial that no other country has information over China. It's a mutual, unofficially mutual process that has been established with the emergence of cyber laws, with the emergence of cyberspace, because there's no one to govern the cyberspace. There are no laws to govern the cyberspace. So what happens is governments start collecting data about each other, and obviously, because you never know what kind of data they might be or what kind of sensitive information it might be, but you still need it at the end of the day. Consider you going on a war, or you want to expose a nation for what it is, you definitely need those things to do it. And as you said, internet has brought in good things and bad things, but unfortunately we see internet bringing more bad things to these days, except for more good things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially considering how much hate you spread on social media, how you're using social media as a source of propaganda. It's all been, governments have been acting in multiple ways, and cyber um, space has been one big beneficial for the governments exclusively all around the world. So as you said, like China's collecting your information. Yes, that's true. And at the end of the day, you should also realize, like while I was in the USI, we always had this discussion with one of the ex army colonel, and he always used to say how even the information sources we are using, the cell phones we are using, which are being produced by China, they might all have, consist some kind of equipments that might generally track down where the whole population is, or generally track down what the population is doing. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, no country is prepared for it, or no country wants to embrace itself. Now, this might be a conspiracy theory, this might not be a conspiracy theory, but at the end of the day, every nation has to take up its deterrence policies towards cyber attacks or cyber espionage or cyber warfare. And that's where we are heading right now. I mean, one way cyberspace has been a major boost in international relations, fortunately or unfortunately, I should say.
I mean, is there any, like international organization that has come together, creating one universal cyber law or any
Right.
such things or started, or like, is it in talks yet to start or something like that?
No. So there's one in the EU. That's the Budapest Convention, which says cyber attacks within each other's countries would be very disastrous, and it's obviously due to extradition. Like if a citizen of Germany hacks into France system, or if a citizen of Germany conducts a cyber attack on France system, France has the right to arrest them or extradite them as a part of prisoner swap treaties. Uh, but except for that, there is nothing else that's existing all around the world. I mean, as you say about international institutions, unfortunately, in a layman's term, or at least in my opinion, I think international institution runs by a nation's interest, right? It
Yeah.
runs on what nations really want them to do. So if a nation is willing to use the cyberspace to collect information on you so that it can defend itself, or it can launch an attack for its own national interest, why would a nation be interested in bringing up cyber laws in itself? That's my basic question. And also, you see how Donald Trump got elected. There was a lot of news
Yeah.
on Russia being involved, and Russia
Yeah.
and US have a permanent membership seat in the UNSC. So these are the P5 powers. These are the major powers who don't want to take the responsibility. So you don't expect the world to take up the responsibility. And I don't think anyone's going to come up with this. Although there have been attempts to do it, but there have been a few, a kind of, what do you say, a few portfolio of a few platforms established where countries can legally get involved into cyber warfare. as a part of deterrence, or as a part of how do you say a part of preventing someone else from attacking. So say your system is being attacked, or your system or a country is planning to conduct a mass cyber attack onto your systems, onto your infrastructure, then you have a right to use cyber warfare, a right to use your cyber attacks against the country, so that you can deter this attack from happening. One example I can cite was from Russia and Georgia. Like when Georgia was in a war with Russia, Russia
Hmm.
completely hacked Georgian system. It completely stopped the inflow of funding, and it completely stopped the operating of banks for
Hmm.
3 or 4 days, which basically suffocated a lot of Georgian citizens. So this is one thing
Yeah.
nation states should always be aware of.
But yeah, I think we have to come a long way.
Hmm.
Uh, we are still very far
We're
to
still very
achieve that best regulation for cyber laws, because let's say something like doxing, which is a basic attack, where I've seen a documentary where these hackers, ethical hackers, are trying to dox government agencies
Mhm.
just as a symbol of protest,
Yeah.
which is not really a great attack or something, that they are stealing data
Yeah,
or
yeah,
anything like that.
yeah. Mm.
So that part is also there, and the most worrying part is that most of these, like, you might have seen those Senate hearings with Facebook, Twitter, after the Russian meddling and stuff. So these really old boomer senates were asking Mark Zuckerberg why his Apple iPhone is not working the way it's supposed to.
Mm.
So there are a lot of these kind of people who need to understand the technology in the first place
Right.
to create a good cyber law. I think we are still really far from achieving that.
Yeah.
And also, I have this question. Like, there are these whistleblowers who have, really,
Like Edward Snowden,
yeah,
like, yeah,
Edward Snowden, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, and all
yeah,
these guys.
yeah,
They really, gave this kind of a hint, or like what you call the tip of the iceberg, where all these conspiracy theories are possible.
Uh, I wouldn't say so. I mean, Snowden was a huge whistleblower, considering U.S. Surveillance or other countries in its prison mechanism. I think these things were mandatory to happen. Sometimes when your countries take 5 steps ahead, it's a responsible citizen or responsible human beings. Um, you know. At least according to his will, if he wants to stand up and say someone's wrong, or someone's doing something that's not good for this world, or something that's not good for this country, I think it's right time for you to stand up and protest. In way, again, I'm not saying Edward Snowden did the best thing ever, but I'm just saying, sometimes when your countries try to um, just cross over the limit for no reason, or say just
yeah,
under the disguise of national security, sometimes it's good to stand up and say you're wrong, or expose the country to the world. So I think that's where a lot of things happen, and that's supposed to
yeah,
be. That's what I believe.
And also, I have this one more question. So, I mean, I feel that as India is not so really strong, Indian government websites or Indian government presence on the internet and the usage of internet is
Mhm.
not really remarkably good enough, or like the cyber security is not really strong enough.
Right.
I feel like we are really vulnerable to like people coming in and hacking, and like all the sensitive data, like the
Mhm.
military data, the secret international affairs data, and everything can be lost, because there were instances where some of the best Indian websites were also cracked and hacked by some of these hackers in
Right.
foreign countries. So like, where is the Indian game right now? Like
uh,
because we are talking about digital India, but nobody is talking about cyber security. There are
right.
like accusations on this Arogya Setu app. Recently this Unacademy app, which was run by a couple of civil servants and all of these guys,
Right.
even that company was also got hacked, and all this user information was being leaked just by some of these tiny hackers from different countries. I feel that is how vulnerable we are. That may be a big problem in future, as because
Mm.
we have a lot of sensitive information right now. The
hmm,
situation is also like kind of heated up, because
Right.
the India and China thing is not really going well and stuff. So
Right.
what is your inner on this
Yes.
as well?
So as far as this is concerned, I mean, we speak of digital India. We speak of India becoming a superpower. We speak of India becoming a Vishwa Guru, but we're still far away from where we are supposed to be. In the world of
hmm,
cyber game, in the world of cyber security, the topmost players are, as assumed, US. Russia,
Yeah.
China, North Korea, UK, and unfortunately, we have heard instances where Pakistan has asked its non-state actors to hack into Indian systems. It's
Yeah.
disastrous where we are heading to. I mean, I'm very sorry to say this, but we don't really have a general, a very precise cyber security policy to defend ourselves. There have been instances we have read a lot about, the Kundakulam nuclear power plant being hacked in itself. So imagine if our nuclear plant can be hacked, what disasters are set to
Yeah.
unfold in the
True.
coming days. And this wasn't done by anyone. Rather, people from North Korea have claimed, to have hacked the system. I mean, imagine North Korea, which has nothing to do with India, and India has nothing to do with North Korea. So you imagine how people from smaller countries and people from rogue nations are trying to get into
Yeah.
the nerves and the heart of Indian nuclear deterrence policy. So it's one thing we need to understand. Um, we do have a lot of outdated laws when it comes to cyber security, but
True.
also we don't have a precise cyber security strategy to deal with these kind of offenders. So there was this article I wrote with the Statesman. There was this opinion article that I wrote on using coercive
Hmm.
diplomacy. So coercive diplomacy is something in between diplomacy and in between complete warfare. So I said, if India has to teach Pakistan a lesson, we have like approximately 1.5 million graduates from computer science, from information technology. We can use these non-state actors as state actors. We can use
Hmm.
these non-state actors for our policies as informally as possible. Just say how Pakistan uses its terrorists to
Hmm.
infiltrate into Indian borders, cause devastation, and distances itself from the terrorist. We can do the same thing. Just uh, use the non-state actors, distance the government from the non-state actor, and say whatever these people have done is on their own will, and the government has nothing to do with it. And at the same point of time, as I said, there's no law that covers on cyberspace. There's no law that asks on extradition of cyber attackers. So in a way, these people are kept safe within Indian sovereign territories itself, and at the same point of time, we achieve what we really want to do achieve.
So this is kind of a long question. So I'm just curious on it's about China and how China will address this my question.
Right,
So these there are these initiatives like, let's say, China Pakistan Economic Corridor or One Belt One Road initiative,
right,
which when initially it started, obviously the gurus were telling that it's going to fail because Pakistan does not have this infrastructure, it has this inflation, its
right.
economy is not good, and all this. And it actually failed. I came across an article which literally said a corridor to nowhere.
Mm,
So this has obviously failed,
right.
and everyone knows about the Chinese debt trap.
Mm-hmm.
So the CPEC investments, out of all the investment, 80% should be reimbursed by Pakistan,
Right.
which I everyone knows, even they know that they cannot do that.
True.
So yeah, and everyone knows about this debt trap, right? And on the other hand, the Chinese hostility is growing everywhere.
Right.
Let's say UAV for 5G, this thing where
Yeah.
it literally has got good technology, but the Americans are just not ready to use it because of the credibility of Chinese
Yes. Yes.
technology, right?
True.
So one hand you have all these investments
Yep.
which they can control, which like they can literally control the sovereignty there
Mm-hmm.
in Pakistan. But on the other end, when you want other like foreign companies to come and settle there, and you have these big plans like bullet trains from Beijing to Moscow,
Mm-hmm.
and all these things happening, and hostility is going growing towards your country,
Right.
how do you kind of address this? Like, how do you come out of this
Uh,
from a Chinese perspective?
from a Chinese perspective, I mean, I would first say, a lot of people have predicted, the Chinese Belt Road Initiative as a major failure,
Yeah.
which I presume is quite over exaggerated. I mean, I understand China's got a lot of hostility coming around, but if you see, it has a lot of popularity going around with the developing countries and smaller countries as well. Say now, Nepal is under more Chinese influence than it has ever been. Bhutan is trying to start up a conversation with China because they're obviously scared with China, scared of
Hmm.
China's might, and Bangladesh has gotten into debt trap of the Chinese. The Sri Lanka has been
Yeah.
there. Pakistan has obviously been there, and
Yeah.
countries in Africa. where US had withdrawn itself from funding, saying that citing human right abuses, human right violations.
Hmm.
China has been a major playing in funding these governments, funding these regimes, saying that we don't really care about what kind of regime you are, we're just going to fund, and we're just going
Yeah.
to make sure you develop. So in a way, it's piercing rightly through the rogue governments, and it's also building up its credibility amongst these countries
Hmm.
with several African countries and several developing countries. It has, for God's sake, it has already started investing in Latin
Hmm.
America as well, which is a huge threat to US and US
Yeah.
hegemony, considering how it rules all over the two American continents. Um, so
Hmm.
it's saying it's quite disastrous right now is quite over exaggerated. That's what I would say. I mean, everyone knows of its debt trap diplomacy, and everyone knows it has uh,
Yeah.
quite a lot of negative sentiments attached to it. But at the same point of time, we
Hmm.
can't deny the total the total strength it's gonna in orbit with the other small states and with the other developing countries. Say
Hmm.
China, like you say, you're in countries which has a lot of issues. Say US, say India, say
Hmm.
Australia, say Japan. We are still the major traders of Chinese. We are still major contributors of Chinese trade economy, and especially US tops among the list. So, um,
Yeah.
in a way, there's this anti-Chinese sentiments growing around, but I don't think they're gonna implement or they're gonna impact OBOR or CPEC to a major extent. Say no,
Yeah.
CPEC, everyone knows that this is going to be a disaster for Pakistan's domestic economy. But
Yeah.
say one thing is, I came across this interesting article where I was writing on how China's policy is basically a neo-colonial policy. It says,
Hmm.
first thing is China disburses amount of loan to Pakistan directly from the Chinese banks, and
Hmm.
Pakistan has to pay this back with a certain amount of interest, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way, it's a loss for Pakistan, because the China says in its agreement that if it's gonna if it's gonna disperse its loan to Pakistan, it's also gonna send its labor and its own infrastructure and its own manufactured commodities for this whole project. So in a way,
Hmm.
China is providing loan to Pakistan from its own bank with high interest rates, and on the other
Hmm.
hand, Pakistan has just got to pay back this loan without boosting its economy, without providing employment to its citizen, without providing jobs to its own fellow citizens, or without even caring about how it's gonna pay back this huge amounts of money. So, on the other hand, China is just lending the money. It's increasing its own industries. It's providing more employment to its own labor, and it's also providing more
Hmm.
infrastructure and boosting its own economy at the cost of Pakistan, while Pakistan has to still pay back the loan.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a total loss to Pakistan. But at the same point of time, both China and Pakistan knows that they need each other to keep India in check at the current scenario.
Yeah.
So keeping that aside, I don't think having so much influence with all these countries. I don't think BRI would be such a big flop as people presume it to be. I
Hmm.
understand, like, a lot of people have raised concerns about how Chinese debt trap diplomacy is going to be in the few coming years, which might
Hmm.
be true and which can't be denied of their rising bully and assertiveness all over the world.
Yeah.
But it still can't be a huge failure that people presume it has to be, or it is going to be in the few coming days.
Hmm. And about Atmanirbhar Bharat,
Right.
which we have to talk about.
Hmm.
And before we start a discussion on this, just a little disclaimer
Right.
that these are just our
Hmm.
opinions. We are not trying to insult any government
Right. Right.
or anything,
Right.
but this is just what I feel. Like, it's good. We have to be vocal for local and all that stuff.
Right.
I completely agree with it.
Right.
But where India fails is providing that environment for businesses to thrive on, right?
Hmm.
They just say, like, we will stop all these imports from China,
Yeah.
we will start doing our own thing, but then our businesses will lose their competitive edge
Hmm.
and the prices starts going up. So what, how do you think India should approach this problem and create a better environment for businesses so that Atmanirbhar Bharat will truly become a achievable dream?
Right. I'm a bit tricked up with this question because I'm not. I didn't pursue my master's in economics, but I'm still going to add up because I did my undergraduate in economics and
But
political
yeah.
science. Um,
Yeah.
in a way, I mean, self-reliance and self-reliability for India isn't a new thing, or it hasn't been completely brought up with Modi. Even Indira Gandhi wanted a self-reliant India. That's why she brought up the whole green revolution, propped up through the
Yeah,
US assistance and all these things. In a way,
yeah,
Atmanirbhar Bharat is quite exaggerated, I would say, because um, no country, especially considering these days, would want to be free of trade. You
yeah,
remember, like, every country wants to trade with the other countries because you want to produce surplus, you want to export the surplus, and you want other countries goods to come in, because probably the other country might be good at that resource and you can't be good at this resource or this product, say
mm,
whatever it is. So that's one thing we always need to keep in mind. But as far as Atmanirbhar Bharat is concerned, we need investments, and for investments to flow, when Indians aren't that rich at this point of time, like, not
mm.
everyone can be an Ambani, or not everyone can be, high
Adani.
class billionaire Adani to just come and
Yeah,
invest and provide so much employment. We need other foreign direct investments to come in. We need people to invest. We
true.
need partners to trade, and this is not going to be an easy task. So as far as this is concerned, we are also um, caught up somewhere very, very, in a tricky situation where our labor laws are quite rigid, because
Yeah,
obviously
true.
we consider importance to the labor lives when compared to the other countries, which considering our socialist nature, and we don't want the capitalists to generally hawk on the labor's lives. So that's one thing we
Yeah,
always
that's
have
true.
to keep in mind. On the other hand, we also need to start attracting investments from other countries. Right now, Chinese investments are going to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Bangladesh, but not to India, because they say, Indian. There's so much of um, you know instability in Indian economy right now, because you guys are going into a recession, and you still have this new things about GST coming up every month, every now and then you still have
True.
this demonetization, which is going to be disastrous for our finances. And added on that, you still have rigid labor laws. We can't exploit them. We can't provide cheap labor laws. We can't provide them with cheap funds and with cheap money or with cheap wages, which makes things
Mm.
quite complicated. And that's one thing which India has to focus. But at the end of the day, India even can't give up on its own labor and labor laws, right? Because we need to protect our labor, and they're every part and parcel of our nation. Um,
Yeah.
so it's quite
But I think we just have to get that right balance where
right,
they're not completely exploited or
right.
completely favored, right?
True,
Yeah.
true. And we also need to, understand, like, we can be self-reliant, we can be Atmanirbhar, but not in every single thing in this world. There are few things
That
which
is
we are good at, fine, I get it. Like, steel, be it iron, we're really good at it, and we should probably stick on to that.
true.
But
Yeah.
if we say we have good garments in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh garments are better than Indians, then we don't have to, be self-reliant in garments, rather import what's coming from Bangladesh, and say with a cheaper and diplomatic negotiable prices, rather than paying huge lofty sums on it.
Yeah, but this brings up another interesting
Hmm.
question, right? So we are this globalized economy,
Right.
and every globalized economy has to participate with one other country at some point of time,
Hmm.
right? So when you have this sentiment that, let's say, one country, let's just not consider China because it's an extreme
Right.
case. Let's just say that a country does not fall in line with a certain policy of your domestic policies of your
Right.
country, and that government, let's say, kind of opposes it,
Hmm.
and then you have this sentiment in people that, yeah, let's just ban those countries'
Right.
goods, let's say Malaysia.
Hmm.
So what effect can that have to a globalized economy in the international relations space?
Right. I mean, that's a tricky question again. Like, because if you think you're gonna ban Chinese products, or if you're gonna ban Malaysian products, or you're gonna boycott them, you
Hmm.
need to know how many people are actually boycotting them with you, right? Because
True.
you say, okay, fine, I'm gonna boycott it because I'm rich, I can afford more higher prices for so and so goods. I can pay like 100 rupees rather than 50 rupees for the same oil. I can pay 100 rupees and I can buy it. Rather, I keep my national self prestige alive. But at the same point of time, you need
Hmm.
to see people are poor. People, not everyone is on the
Yeah.
same line. Not everyone is on the same line to spend so much money on the same thing, just because you don't agree with what a nation's prime minister has said, what the government has been doing. So that's one thing that comes always with informal boycott of a good. And again, on the other hand, when you informally boycott it,
Hmm.
On the other hand, your government still continues to trade. Your government still brings in hefty amount of investments from the other country. It makes no
Hmm.
big change to the domestic politics of country. And at the end of the day, there's no way that economic boycott would bring a major change into a country's economy, or into a country's domestic politics. But because you also need to keep in mind what your domestic population needs from your policy, or what your domestic
Hmm.
population thinks of your country. Say tomorrow you're gonna boycott so and so good, saying that because Malaysian Prime Minister spoke about Kashmir, the
Hmm.
Malaysian Prime Minister is not going to change his mindset, because you need to see Malaysian population is predominantly Muslim, with around 75 to 80% of population being
Yeah.
Muslim, and most of them favor Kashmir independence, or most of them favor being part of Pakistan. So why would you think the prime minister would rather change his domestic policy
Yeah.
just to hit on his own feet and to lose his own domestic votes or own domestic constituencies? So that's
Yeah.
one thing we always have to keep in mind. So are these boycotts going to work? Yes, to some extent, but not to that extent. I mean, that we consider it's going to impact, or it's going to destroy the country's domestic politics, or destroy the country's whatever we think it is.
One last question
Sure, sure.
from my side.
Okay. Go ahead.
How effective are these international organizations? I mean, this Ministry of External Affairs, this
Right.
SARC treaties, and
Mhm.
all these countries coming together, forming up these unions and stuff. How
Right.
effective are these, and like how important role are these playing? In making things work out. Like helping other nations, and
Right. Well, I wouldn't say, first thing, I wouldn't say Ministry of External Affairs is an international organization. It's an internal organ of India, and it's an internal organ of foreign policy formulation. So I wouldn't rather consider it as a part of international organization. Rather, what I would consider as SARC as a regional organization, UN, ILO, labor organization, International Maritime Organization, a lot of other organization as these kind of stuff. As we discussed before, again, international organization works on countries, and countries work on their national interests. So in a way, if you think international organizations are hyper productive, then I don't think that's the true case of it. Say countries came together to fight coronavirus because that was in their mutual national interest to fight against the coronavirus. But if only China had suffered, or only if India had suffered, then no other country would have come forward to help help India, or help China, or coordinate against for so and so step. And that's always been there, because if international organizations were that productive, I understand they have been productive, but not to the extent we assume it to be. If they were that productive, then probably genocides wouldn't never happened in so many
Yeah.
African countries, and even in the Europe during the Albanian war, and the Kosovo and Albanian crisis. Like, countries were right on to the feet, and they were witnessing genocides, they were witnessing mass murders of citizens, they were witnessing mass murder of non-combatants, but the countries didn't want to involve, because they didn't want to lose their troops, they didn't want to lose their money over some other country. And this is just what it happens. Say, um, just consider Kashmir in itself as a big example. Pakistan claims it to be, India claims it to be. In Mishap, a lot of citizens have lost their own life, right? But the international community doesn't really want to care a lot about it, or doesn't want to really emphasize on it, despite of having so many missions or resolutions on Kashmir. Because one thing is, either US stands in support of India, or say Russia stands in support of India against Kashmir or against Pakistan. So these are things we always need to keep in mind. Despite of international organizations, there's several limitations to how they cooperate, or how they try to bring in a global solution to challenges, unless there is a need for these countries, uh, unless there's a need for these countries to cooperate, and unless there is a mutual national interest embedded in how they cooperate against these so-called global disasters, such as like what you're seeing in the COVID crisis right now.
Aditya, it's been lovely having you on the podcast,
It's been my
and
pleasure as well.
to all the listeners. Aditya is really an approachable guy. He has a really cool blog. You can check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. And if you have any queries about international relations, or how do you pursue it academically, or something like that, you can always just text Aditya. He is very nice to everyone. And
That,
one thing
that's quite over assumptuous, but I take it as a compliment.
But I was a complete stranger when I texted you, and that's what I felt. And
Right.
I'm just telling my experience.
I mean, I always say this to people. I mean, probably to the people who are listening to me as well. You know, if you have something that you have learned, it's always good to share, because that's the only thing you probably have to give it for free. There's nothing lost. There's nothing going in vain if you have to share your knowledge, if you have to share your insight, if you
True,
have to share your opinions with someone else. And that's why I thought it's
true.
better to talk to you people, because in a way I can express myself and I can share my views, and also let people know whatever it is, or let, and I get the mutual, benefit of sharing things with people and understanding
Yeah,
concepts better.
yeah. And I think you just summed up our podcast in a really good way.
Yeah, man,
Thank you.
and you have done justice for whatever you have just told right now. I mean, like, that was really an informative one with a lot of different perspectives or different positions where one layman couldn't see through or what really is happening. Thank you, Aditya, for coming on board. I mean,
It's
it
my
means a
pleasure.
lot,
Thank you.
taking up your time and a lot of energy and effort to two stranger curious kids. It means a lot.
My pleasure. My
True.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
so much for having me. Yeah.